June 7th, 1942, the night the light went out in Saint-Mathieu. The sea was calm that night, a dark blue sheet stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The old lighthouse stood on the cliffs like a sentinel of stone, its great beams slicing through the mist every 12 seconds. To the villagers below, that light had always meant safety. Fishermen returning home, sailors steering clear of rocks, families sleeping easy, knowing someone watched over the sea. But on that evening, the light faltered. Then it went out. Inside the tower, Henri Leclerc, the lighthouse keeper, stood with his hand resting on the great lever that had dimmed the lamp. His daughter, Claire, only 12, stared up at him with wide eyes. "Papa," she whispered, "why did you turn it off?" Henri didn't answer at first. He could still hear the heavy boots of the German soldiers echoing down the stone stairs. They had come only minutes earlier. 3 of them, led by a young officer with cold grey eyes. The officer's words still rang in Henri's ears. "By order of the Reich, the lighthouse will remain dark. Any light could betray our submarines to the enemy. You will comply." Henri had nodded silently. Disobedience meant arrest, or worse. Now, as the silence of the sea pressed against the tower walls, he whispered back to his daughter. "Because they told me to, Claire." She frowned. "But the ship's out there. They won't see the rocks." Henri sighed. "No, they won't." The next morning, the village of Saint-Mathieu woke uneasy. Without the lighthouse, the harbour felt blind. Fishermen refused to sail. Mothers kept their children close. The Germans had taken over the old mayor's house on the hill, turning it into their command post. A swastika flag fluttered above it, though Henri tried not to look. Every day he climbed the tower as he always had, pretending to work, polishing lenses, checking gears, watching the sea through his binoculars. But he was no longer the master of the light. Claire would join him after school, carrying a small lunch basket. Together they sat at the top of the tower in silence. Sometimes she'd bring her notebook and practice her lessons by the window. One day, as she scribbled her letters, she asked softly, "Papa, what will happen if the ships crash because they can't see?" Henri looked out at the horizon. "Then they'll sink, Claire." She was quiet for a moment. "Couldn't we help them? Another way?" Henri smiled sadly. "There is no other way. The Germans would know." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure he believed it. That night, Henri climbed to the lantern room long after the curfew bell. The village was asleep. The German sentry at the base of the cliff had gone inside to escape the wind. He stood before the great Fresnel lens, a masterpiece of glass and steel, and lit a single small flame no bigger than a candle. The light flickered through the prisms, throwing soft patterns on the walls. For 20 years this light had been his life. It had guided thousands of sailors safely home through storms and fog. Now he was ordered to keep it dark, to turn his duty into a weapon of silence. He thought of the men out there, the Allied ships that sometimes passed near the coast, searching for safe passage. He thought of the young sailors who would never see this shore because of him. That thought burned more deeply than any order. When he came down, Claire was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. She held a small book in her hands, a book he had taught her from when she was younger. "Morse code," she said proudly. "Remember, you taught me when we sent messages to the fishermen." Henri smiled faintly. "Oui, I remember." She looked up at him, eyes shining. "We could use it again, Papa. We could talk to the ships." He hesitated. The Germans would see. "Not if we use the shutters," she said quickly. "Like you showed me, open, close, open, close. From far away, it would just look like the wind moving the light." Henri stared at her for a long moment. a child's idea, simple and dangerous. But behind her words was something that stirred in him, something that had been buried under fear for months. Hope. The next evening, Henri began to test the mechanism. The great lamp remained unlit, but the shutters could move freely. He oiled the gears, loosened the levers, and marked a small rhythm on the console with chalk. Claire watched, holding the Morse chart. "Let's try the first letter," Henri said quietly. S. He flicked the lever, 3 short flashes, then O, 3 long, then again S, 3 short. The light that spilled out through the narrow cracks was faint, barely visible from the cliffs below, but out to sea on a clear night, that pattern would travel far. They practiced for hours, sending harmless words, hello, safe, home. The code felt like breathing again. And then, one foggy night, Henri saw it, 2 faint lights offshore blinking back, 3 long flashes, 1 short, a reply. The Allied ships were out there, and they had seen him. From that night on, the tower became their secret battleground. Each evening, once the German sentries left their rounds, Henri and Claire climbed the stairs and sent coded flashes into the dark. At first, just warnings, rocks ahead, stay north, U-boats near. Then more complex messages sent with trembling hands, enemy patrol inland, safe to pass at dawn. He didn't know who received them or how many lives they saved, but sometimes, faintly across the water, he'd see a small light blink twice in answer, a silent thank you. But secrets could never stay hidden for long. One afternoon, while repairing the base shutters, Henri saw 2 German officers walking toward the tower. One carried a folder, the other binoculars. They stopped at the entrance. "Leclerc," the younger one said sharply, "there are reports from command that enemy ships have been avoiding our sector. Perfectly. Every night. Do you know anything about this?" Henri kept his expression calm. "No, sir. The light remains off, as ordered." The officer glanced up the tower. "We will inspect your mechanism tonight." Henri's heart skipped a beat. "Tonight?" "Yes. We will make sure your light stays dark." When they left, Claire came running from the rocks below. "Papa, what did they say?" Henri knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders. "They're coming tonight. We mustn't send any messages, not even one." She looked up at him with worry. "What if a ship comes?" "Then," he said softly, "we pray they pass safely." That night, for the first time in weeks, the lighthouse stayed silent. The Germans arrived after sunset, checked every lever and switch, and left satisfied. But Henri couldn't sleep. He stood at the window, watching the sea, black and endless. Somewhere out there, unseen in the dark, he imagined ships moving blind, searching for a light that would never come. And he made a promise, to himself, to the sea, to every sailor who'd ever looked for that light. Tomorrow he would find a way. Even in the darkest times, the light must not die. June 12, 1942, the first message of hope crossed the dark sea. The morning came quiet, as most mornings did in occupied France. The sea was flat and silver under the rising sun, the village still half asleep. But inside the lighthouse, Henri Leclerc was already awake, standing at his desk with a pencil and a map spread before him. He had marked every shipwreck along the coast since the Germans ordered his light extinguished, small black crosses near the jagged reefs. There were 7 now, 7 ships that might have seen the light if it had still been burning. His daughter, Claire, stood nearby, tying back her hair with a piece of blue ribbon. "Are you going to send again tonight, Papa?" Henri looked up, weary. "They're watching us now. I can't risk it." Claire came closer, lowering her voice. "But if we don't, more ships will crash." Henri sighed. I know. He rested a hand on the map. We'll find another way. But for now, silence is our only shield. That day, 2 German trucks arrived at the harbour. Soldiers unloaded wooden crates, radio equipment, wires, and small metal cases. We are installing new signal equipment in your lighthouse for monitoring Allied frequencies. Henri stiffened. Will it interfere with my work, sir? Müller gave a thin smile. You have no work anymore, but your tower will be useful. The soldiers carried up the crates, setting up a small radio table on the middle landing. Wires coiled like snakes across the stone floor. Henri felt his heart sink. The Germans would now be listening to every signal within miles. His light was no longer just watched, it was trapped. That night, the tower was alive with static and the hum of radio tubes. German technicians spoke in low tones as they tuned frequencies. Henri pretended to sweep the stairs, but his eyes lingered on their dials. He recognized the symbols. They were monitoring Allied naval signals. He realized then, if he could learn their patterns, he could send messages around them, hidden between their own transmissions. But he'd need help. The next day, he visited Father Moreau, the old priest of Saint-Mathieu. The Germans had allowed the church to remain open, though the bells no longer rang. Henri trusted the priest. He had baptized Claire, and he knew the ways of silence. They met inside the empty chapel, candles flickering against the stone. Henri whispered, Father, I need to get a message to the resistance in Brest. The priest frowned. That is no small request. Why? Henri glanced toward the stained glass window, where sunlight fell like broken jewels. Because I can send signals to the Allied ships, but the Germans are listening now. I need a code, a real one. Father Moreau studied him. You risk your life and your daughter's. Are you sure? Henri nodded. We have been silent too long. The priest thought for a moment, then reached beneath his robes and handed Henri a small scrap of paper. There is a man named Pierre Lenoir. He brings supplies to the village on his bicycle. He rides past your tower every 3rd evening. Tell him I sent you. Henri folded the note carefully into his coat. Merci, Father. Go with God, the priest said quietly, and may your light guide more than just ships. That night, the Germans packed up their radio for the evening and locked the tower base. Henri waited until the patrol lights vanished from the cliffs. Then he and Claire slipped out through the small door behind the oil shed. The stars were bright, countless small lights burning above a world of darkness. As they walked down the narrow path, Claire whispered, Where are we going? To meet someone who can help us speak, Henri said. They reached the old road just as the sound of a bicycle approached, a faint rattle of metal, the steady crunch of tires on gravel. A man appeared from the shadows, his face half hidden beneath a flat cap. Henri Leclerc? He whispered. Yes. Father Moreau said you needed a way to talk to London. Henri nodded, and fast. Pierre smiled slightly. Then you will need this. He opened a small satchel and handed Henri a metal tin no larger than a loaf of bread. Inside was a portable transmitter, a resistance radio. Henri's eyes widened. How? It was meant for a fisherman near Brest, but I think you will use it better. Henri held the device as though it were gold. Thank you. Pierre leaned close. Be careful. The Germans have radio detectors in the next town. Send only short bursts, 2 minutes, no more, and change your frequency often. I understand. Pierre smiled faintly. Then may your light reach London, Monsieur Leclerc. and with that, he vanished into the night. The next evening, the tower was dark again, but not silent. Claire sat beside her father as he set up the small transmitter near the base of the great lamp. The faint hum of the machine filled the air. Henri adjusted the dial, watching the needle twitch. "London should be listening around this frequency," he murmured. Claire opened her notebook where she had written out their Morse messages. "What will you tell them?" Henri hesitated. Then he tapped the key gently, sending a steady rhythm into the night. "From Saint-Mathieu lighthouse, civilian signal. We are safe. Can warn ships. Need code for messages. Reply on frequency 4.1. He stopped the transmission, heart pounding. "Now we wait." Minutes passed. The sea whispered against the rocks below. Claire held her breath. Then, 3 short bursts, faint but clear, came through the speaker. "Message received. Godspeed." Claire gasped. "Papa, they heard us." Henri exhaled, relief and fear washing through him. "Yes," he said softly. "Now we are not alone." In the days that followed, their system evolved. London sent them short codes every night, hidden between radio static. Henri would write them down and translate them into flashes of light using the lighthouse shutters. Claire memorized each signal, practicing until she could send them perfectly in Morse. Together, they became the unseen guardians of the sea, father and daughter flickering hope through the fog. But the Germans were not fools. One night, Lieutenant Müller stood on the cliffs, smoking his cigarette, when he thought he saw something, a faint, rhythmic flicker from the dark tower. Too slow to be wind, too regular to be chance. He narrowed his eyes. "Leclerc," he muttered. "What are you doing up there?" Back inside, Henri had just finished sending a warning. "Enemy patrol off Brittany coast, avoid channel." He was about to shut down when he noticed movement below, the glint of a uniform in the moonlight. He froze. "Papa," Claire whispered, "someone's coming." Henri doused the lantern. The tower plunged into darkness. They held their breath as boots echoed on the stones below. Müller's voice rose faintly through the night. "Lighthouse keeper, open the door." Henri's heart hammered. The radio still hummed quietly behind him. He turned to Claire, whispering urgently, "Hide it, now!" She grabbed the transmitter, wrapping it in her shawl. Together they slid it behind a loose brick in the wall, just as the door below creaked open. Müller's flashlight beam cut through the stairwell. "Leclerc," he barked, "what are you doing in the tower this late?" Henri steadied his voice. "Cleaning the lens, sir." The officer stepped closer, eyes sharp. In the dark, Henri forced a smile. Old habits die hard. Müller's gaze lingered on the shutters. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away. When his footsteps faded, Henri slumped against the wall, shaking. Claire took his hand. "Papa," she whispered, "did he see?" Henri looked toward the Black Sea. "I don't know," he said quietly. "But the light is watching us now too." June 18, 1942. A message meant to save lives nearly cost them their own. The rain had fallen all night, a steady curtain against the cliffs of Saint-Mathieu. By dawn the village smelled of salt and damp stone. The lighthouse loomed grey and ghostly above the waves, its glass windows streaked with water. Inside, Henri Leclerc sat hunched at the wooden table, staring at a coded note from London. His daughter, Claire, sat beside him, drying her soaked boots near the small stove. The message had come through before sunrise, faint but clear in Morse code. "Convoy departing Plymouth, German submarine net near Brest. Confirm Allied passage route." Henri knew what it meant. The British convoy would pass near the French coast within the next 48 hours. If the ships took the wrong channel, they could sail straight into the German submarine trap. They needed guidance, his guidance. But the risk was greater than ever. Lieutenant Miller, the German officer, had begun inspecting the lighthouse almost daily now. He said it was to ensure maintenance, but Henri knew better. Miller was watching him. That afternoon, Henri went down to the village to repair an old fishing lantern for the harbour master. It was an excuse to listen to hear if any word had spread among the villagers. At the cafe, the locals spoke in whispers. "They say the Germans are looking for a radio operator in the area," one man murmured. "They've been sweeping for signals every night." Another leaned closer. "I heard they caught a farmer near Brest, said he was working for the resistance." Henri's hand trembled slightly as he lifted his coffee cup. If the Germans brought those detectors closer, his tiny transmitter could betray him. Still he thought of the convoy, hundreds of sailors counting on a light that could no longer shine. He made his choice before the coffee went cold. That night, Henri climbed the spiral stairs with Claire close behind. The storm had passed, but the wind still moaned through the tower. "Are you sure we should send tonight?" she asked. He nodded. "If we stay silent, men will die." Claire held the flashlight, her small hands steady. "Then we'll send quickly." Henri smiled faintly. "That's my brave girl." They reached the top, where the great lens waited, dark and silent like a sleeping eye. Henri opened the small shutter slit, revealing the sea below. No patrol lights, no soldiers in sight. He placed his fingers on the Morse lever and began to tap. From Saint-Mathieu, use Northern Passage, submarines near Brest, safe course marked by 2 flashes at 02 Zare. Claire timed the signal with her watch. 30 seconds, she whispered. That's all. Henri finished the last pulse and closed the shutters. The tower went dark once more. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, far out on the black horizon, 2 faint lights blinked in answer. Claire smiled. "They saw it, Papa." Henri nodded, his heart full of both relief and dread. Yes, they did. But down below, at the base of the cliffs, another man had seen the flashes. Lieutenant Miller stood beneath his hooded coat, binoculars raised. Rain dripped from the brim as he watched the distant tower. 3 short blinks, 2 long, 1 short. It was not the wind, it was a message. Miller lowered the binoculars slowly. "So," he murmured, "our lighthouse keeper has found a new use for his light." The next morning, German soldiers surrounded the base of the tower. Claire saw them first through the kitchen window and gasped, "Papa, they're here!" Henri's mind raced. He had hidden the radio behind a false panel in the stairwell, but would they find it? A heavy knock echoed on the door. Miller entered, flanked by 2 soldiers. He removed his wet gloves with deliberate calm. "Good morning, Leclerc. You were awake late again, I hear." Henri forced a polite nod. "The storm, sir. The tower needed checking." Miller paced slowly, eyes drifting toward the stairs. "There were unusual lights from your tower last night. Flashes, regular ones." Henri feigned confusion. "Lightning, perhaps?" Miller smiled without warmth. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you are signaling someone." He gestured to a soldier. "Search the tower." The men began climbing. Boots clattered on stone steps. Henri's pulse quickened. He looked at Claire, who stood frozen near the table. "Papa," she whispered. "Stay calm," he murmured. Minutes crawled by. Then one of the soldiers called down, "Nothing, sir." Miller frowned. "Nothing?" "No, sir. Only tools and cleaning supplies." The officer studied Henri for a long moment. Then he leaned closer. "You're a clever man, Leclerc. But if I find even one radio, one battery, or one hidden light, your cleverness will not save you." He turned sharply and left. Only when the trucks were gone did Henri allow himself to breathe again. Later that evening, as the sun sank behind the horizon, Henri and Claire sat on the stairs in silence. The narrow window framed the last golden glow of the sea. Claire finally spoke. "He knows, doesn't he?" Henri nodded. "Yes, he knows." "Then what will we do?" Henri looked up toward the dark lens above them. "We'll do what we've always done, Claire. Keep the light alive, just more carefully." He stood and climbed the final steps to the lantern room. The sunset had faded to deep blue. The waves shimmered faintly below. He turned to his daughter. "Bring me the chart." Claire opened her notebook, flipping to a clean page. Together they drew a new system, one that even Miller's binoculars couldn't trace. Instead of steady flashes, they would use timed shutters, short, irregular bursts that only someone with the correct key could interpret. It would look like nothing more than random flickers from the reflection of the sea. For the next few nights they practiced silently. Henri adjusted the angles of the mirrors while Claire worked out the timing by counting under her breath. 1, 2, 3, pause! 1, 2, pause! 1, 2, 3, 4, pause! Each sequence formed a single letter. It was slower, harder, but invisible to prying eyes. On June 23rd, the new code was ready. The British convoy had safely reached open waters thanks to their last signal, but now London had another message. German patrol advancing west, possible sweep near your sector, hide transmitter. Henri read it twice, then tore the note into small pieces and fed it to the stove. "They're coming," he said quietly. Claire looked up. "For us?" He nodded. "For anyone who still dares to speak." That night, the wind rose again. The sea churned below like black glass. Henri stood before the dark window, the transmitter silent, the shutters still. "Papa," Claire whispered, "will we send tonight?" Henri hesitated. Then he looked down at her small, determined face. "Yes," he said, "but not to London." He turned the lever, sending 3 slow flashes out to sea. Their first message meant for the fishermen of Saint-Mathieu. "Storm coming. Stay in harbour." Claire smiled softly. "You're saving our people now." Henri placed a hand on her shoulder. "Light is light, Claire. It doesn't choose sides. It only shows the way." Down in the village, fishermen saw the flashes through the mist and pulled their boats ashore. The next morning, the storm hit hard. Waves smashing the coast for hours. Not a single boat was lost. And from the cliffs, Lieutenant Miller watched the lighthouse through his binoculars once again. He saw the flashes, but this time they seemed random, innocent. He lowered the glasses and turned to his aide. "Keep an eye on him," he said. "The light still feels wrong." That night, as Henri and Claire sat by the lantern, the tower hummed softly around them. For the first time in months, Henri allowed himself a small smile. The Germans thought they had tamed his light, but it still spoke, quietly, bravely, to those who needed it most. And far across the water, a British ship signaled back, its lights flickering like stars on the horizon. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, SOS. Henri's heart tightened. "Claire," he whispered, "someone needs us." June 24th, 1942, when the sea rose in fury, the line between hope and death blurred beneath the lighthouse's beam. The sky turned black long before night fell. The air smelled of salt and thunder, and the wind screamed across the cliffs like a living thing. From the top of Saint-Mathieu lighthouse, Henri Leclerc could see the storm forming, a monstrous wall of clouds moving in from the Atlantic. The sea below churned with whitecaps, and the horizon had vanished into a curtain of rain. The villagers were safe in their homes thanks to the warning he and Claire had sent the night before. But out there, beyond the cliffs, a faint signal had reached him, an SOS from a ship caught in the storm. "Papa," Claire said softly, clutching her coat, "do you think they're still out there?" Henri looked through the binoculars again. Lightning flashed, and for a split second he saw it, a faint shadow on the horizon, a ship tossed helplessly among the waves. "They're there," he said, "and they're in trouble." He turned to the control lever that worked the shutters. "We have to guide them." Claire's eyes widened. "But the Germans—" "They won't come in this weather," Henri said quickly. "No one will." He began to open and close the shutters, the great lens blinking through sheets of rain. The flashes cut through the storm like veins of light, spelling out a desperate message in Morse. "Steer east, shallow reef ahead, follow light." The tower groaned as the wind battered its walls. The glass panes rattled. Water began to leak through cracks in the ceiling. Claire held the lantern steady while Henri adjusted the mirror angles. Every flash mattered. Every second counted. Down below, waves pounded the cliffs. The ship, a small Allied freighter, fought against the wind. Its engines strained, and the crew shouted over the storm. Through the rain, the captain saw it, the faint blink of a light, rhythmic and deliberate. "That's no German," he yelled. "That's a guide." He ordered the ship to turn east, trusting the code. Slowly, the freighter changed course, scraping past the edge of a hidden reef. Another few meters, and it would have split open like an egg. But the sea wasn't done with them. A massive wave struck the bow, smashing lifeboats and sweeping 2 sailors overboard. The captain screamed for ropes. "Hold on!" he shouted. "Hold on to something!" Above, the flashes continued, steady, unyielding. The light guided them through the storm's heart. Inside the lighthouse, Henri worked until his fingers went numb. His eyes stung from salt and smoke. Claire kept the flame alive, feeding the burner with oil. "Papa!" she cried over the wind. "The wick is dying!" Henri checked the gauge, barely enough fuel for another hour. "It'll have to last," he said. Thunder boomed overhead, shaking the floor beneath their feet. A bolt of lightning struck nearby, filling the room with a flash so bright it left them blind for seconds. Claire gasped. "The roof, look!" Cracks spread across the upper glass panel. One more hit, and the wind would tear it apart. Henri grabbed the metal brace and pushed against the window, holding it as tightly as he could. The storm howled around them, but he refused to let go. "The light must stay on," he muttered through gritted teeth. "Always." For hours they fought. The storm clawed at the tower, the sea roared below. And still the light burned. Then at last the rain began to ease. The wind softened. The first grey light of dawn crept through the clouds. Henri leaned against the railing, exhausted. "It's over," he whispered. Claire looked out to sea. "Papa, look!" On the horizon, the ship had survived. It moved slowly, battered but afloat, its lights blinking faintly in gratitude. Henri smiled for the first time in days. "They made it." Claire pressed her hand to the glass. "Because of you." Henri shook his head. "Because of us." But down the coast, the peace did not last. A German patrol car, drenched and sputtering from the storm, rolled into Saint-Mathieu at dawn. Lieutenant Müller climbed out, his uniform soaked but his face as sharp as ever. He had seen the storm S-light, faint flashes through the rain, and he hadn't believed it was lightning. "This place," he muttered to his aide, "always shines when it shouldn't." They marched toward the lighthouse, boots squelching in mud. By the time they arrived, Henri and Claire were already cleaning the lantern room. The glass was cracked, the floor covered in water and oil. Müller entered without knocking. "Quite a storm," he said. Henri turned slowly. "Yes, sir. The worst I've seen in years." "You were awake all night?" "I had to be," Henri said. "If the tower failed, the structure could have collapsed." Müller circled the room, his boots crunching on broken glass. "Strange. I saw light through the storm, strong light." Henri gestured toward the lamp. "The wind was shifting the shutters. The beam must have escaped." Müller stared at him for a long time. Then his gaze drifted to Claire, standing silently by the wall. Her hands were trembling. Müller smiled faintly. "You're both brave, working through the storm." He stepped closer to the window, looking out at the sea. The horizon was clear now. A few pieces of wreckage floated far below. "Many ships sink in weather like this," he said. "But not last night. Last night the sea was merciful." He turned sharply to Henri. "Tell me, why do you think that is?" Henri met his gaze without blinking. "Luck, perhaps." Müller studied him for a moment longer. Then he nodded. "Perhaps." He turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. "One day, Monsieur Leclerc, I will understand your luck." That night, the storm clouds cleared completely. The stars returned, glimmering over the calm sea. Henri sat outside the lighthouse, staring at the horizon where the freighter had vanished. Claire joined him, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "Do you think he knows?" she asked. Henri sighed. "He suspects, but suspicion is not proof." "And if he finds proof?" Henri looked toward the silent light above them. "Then we make sure he doesn't." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal box, the spare transmitter. "It's time to move this. We'll hide it in the cliffs." Claire frowned. "But that's dangerous." He smiled sadly. "So is keeping it here." Together, under the starlight, they climbed down the narrow path to the cliffs. The sea whispered below them, gentle now as if grateful. Henri found a small crevice in the rocks and hid the box deep inside, covering it with stones and sand. When they returned, the lighthouse stood tall and quiet against the moonlit sky. Claire looked up at it. "It's strange," she said softly. "Something so bright can hide so much." Henri nodded. "That's why it's survived this long." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Remember, Claire, light is not only what we see, it's what we choose to keep alive." Far away, the freighter's captain wrote in his log, "Survived the storm by guidance of a single unknown light. To whoever held that flame, thank you." The words would never reach Henri. But the ocean, it seemed, had already carried his thanks home. July 3rd, 1942, the war finally reached their door, and the last light of Saint-Mathieu faced its darkest test. The summer morning broke quiet and clear. The sea glimmered silver beneath the sun, and the gulls cried lazily over the cliffs. For the first time in weeks, the world felt calm, but Henri Leclerc knew calm in wartime was only an illusion, like sunlight before a storm. He and Claire spent the morning cleaning the lantern room. The cracked glass from the storm had finally been replaced. The lens gleamed again, a perfect eye ready to see through night and fog. Claire hummed softly as she worked, her face brighter than it had been in days. Henri smiled to see her happy, even for a moment. "You seem lighter today," he said. She looked up. "Because we made it through the storm, because we saved them." Henri nodded slowly. "Yes, but remember the sea always comes back." She frowned a little, not understanding. He didn't explain. Outside, a German patrol truck passed through the village. The sound of its tires on gravel made Henri's stomach tighten. Ever since the night of the storm, Lieutenant Müller had been quiet, too quiet. Henri feared silence more than anger. That afternoon, the village baker came up the path, panting from the climb. He brought a small sack of flour and a warning.
"Henri," he said, glancing over his shoulder, "they've arrested a fisherman from Brest. They say he helped send messages to the British. The Germans found a hidden radio." Henri froze. "A radio?" The baker nodded. "They're searching houses again. They're coming up the coast." Henri's mind raced. The transmitter was hidden in the cliffs now, but if Müller searched the tower thoroughly, he might find the coded papers, the maps, the signal notes. "Thank you," Henri said quietly. "You should go home before they see you here." The baker nodded and hurried down the path. Henri turned to Claire. "We need to hide everything, now." For the next hour, they worked in silence. Henri took the coded notes from the drawer and placed them into an old metal oil can. Claire sealed it with wax, then carried it down to the base of the lighthouse, where they buried it under the stone floor.
The notes, the sketches, the names, all gone. When they were done, Henri stood and looked around the room. Everything appeared normal, just a keeper's home, a daughter's drawings, a light that guided ships. But inside, it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. By evening, thunderheads gathered again on the horizon, not a storm of rain this time, one of soldiers. Through the telescope, Claire spotted the convoy of German trucks winding up the coastal road. "Papa," she whispered, "they're coming." Henri nodded grimly. "It seems our luck has run out." He checked the lantern mechanism, then the small shutter lever he had modified months ago. "If they take me," he said quietly, "you'll know what to do." Claire's eyes widened. "Papa, no, you'll keep the light alive," he said firmly. "That's what matters." The Germans arrived just before sunset. Müller led them, his expression colder than ever. "Leclerc," he said, stepping into the room, "you've been very helpful to the Reich, but I've received reports. Strange signals, unexplained lights." Henri met his gaze calmly. "You've received reports before, Lieutenant, and found nothing." Müller smiled thinly. "Perhaps tonight will be different." He turned to his men. "Search everything from top to bottom." The soldiers moved quickly. They tore open drawers, flipped furniture, climbed the stairs, and checked the lantern room. One soldier even struck the walls, listening for hollow sounds. Claire stood by the door, her fists clenched. Henri placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Breathe," he whispered. After nearly an hour, Müller descended from the tower. "Nothing again?" a soldier reported. Müller frowned. "Nothing." He studied Henri's face. "You are either the most innocent man in France or the most dangerous." Henri said nothing. Müller stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If you are hiding something, Leclerc, it will destroy not just you. It will destroy her." His eyes flicked toward Claire. Henri's jaw tightened. "Leave her out of this." "Then prove your innocence," Müller said. "Tonight. Light your tower for the Reich's ships. They pass the coast at midnight. You will shine for them." Henri stared at him. "You ordered it dark months ago." Müller smiled. "I am ordering it bright again. Consider it a test." He turned to leave. "Midnight, Leclerc. Don't fail." When the soldiers were gone, Claire collapsed onto a chair. "Papa, what will we do?" Henri didn't answer at first. He stared out the window at the sea. If he obeyed, the German ships would have safe passage. If he disobeyed, they would return, and this time not for questioning. He looked at his daughter. Her eyes, so full of courage, reminded him of her mother, the same fierce spark. He took a deep breath. "We will light the tower," he said finally. Claire's mouth fell open. "But—" Henri raised a hand. "We'll light it. Our way." At midnight, the tower came alive once more. The great lens turned, its beams sweeping across the dark water. From the cliffs below, Müller watched, satisfied. "Good," he muttered. At last obedience. But Henri's beam was not meant for the German convoy. Hidden within the rhythm of the shutters was a message, a final act of defiance. "Enemy convoy near Saint-Mathieu. Proceed with caution. Light will mark danger." It was the last signal he would ever send. Minutes later, explosions thundered across the horizon. The Allied planes, alerted by Henri's hidden code, had struck. The German convoy at sea burned in the darkness, red flames flickering against the waves. From the cliffs, Müller stared in disbelief. No. He turned toward the lighthouse, realization dawning on his face. "Leclerc!" he shouted, drawing his pistol. But by the time he reached the tower, Henri was gone. Up in the lantern room, Claire sat alone beside the light. Her eyes were wet, but her hands were steady. The beams still turned, sweeping across the night one last time. Down below, soldiers searched every room. Müller climbed the final stair, only to find the light burning unattended. "Where is he?" he growled. Claire met his gaze, her voice calm. "Gone, like the ships you wanted to save." For a moment, Müller just stared. Then he turned and walked away without a word. Outside, the sea was red with fire. The war had reached their doorstep and past it. At dawn, the lighthouse stood silent again. Smoke drifted from the horizon where the ships had sunk. The Germans were gone. Claire sat alone at the window, holding her father's old watch. The hands had stopped at midnight, the moment the light had last turned. She whispered softly, "You kept your promise, Papa." Years later, long after the war ended, sailors passing Saint-Mathieu told stories. They said that on certain nights when the fog rolled in thick, the old light still blinked, 3 long flashes, 3 short. A message lost to time, a sign of safety, a ghost of courage, and they called it the light in the darkness.